Hello and welcome to Yoga and Wellness with Amanda. In today's video, we are going to talk about yoga props. Now, I know you're thinking maybe props aren't for me, or I don't have props, what can I do, or why would I need yoga props? Hopefully I can answer most of those questions throughout this video, because I want you to know that yoga props are a way to help enhance your yoga practice, and they can be used as tools to help you access poses that maybe you wouldn't quite be able to without the support of the props. We're going to go over using yoga blocks for support and making the yoga mat, the floor, just come a little bit closer to your body. We're going to be going over using a yoga strap, which can be used to kind of be an extension of your arms if you just can't quite reach. And then we're also going to touch on using a yoga blanket, which is a great way to add a little bit extra cushion or a little bit of a support as well if maybe a yoga block is too thick. So we're going to go over each individual prop, and then I'm going to walk through some poses and show you how you can use these in your everyday practice. And if you don't have yoga props, that's totally okay. You can find things similar around your house that you can use, like towels. You can use a belt instead of a yoga strap. You can use any regular blanket or pillow. Even a chair or a step stool or something like that is a very accessible prop that you probably have laying around your house. So I'm going to use actual props to demonstrate these poses today, but just kind of take that moment to realize that these are things that we can incorporate in our practice to aid us, and it's really something that any level of yogi practitioner can use. Yoga props are not just for beginners, they're for anyone who wants to bring their practice to the next level and just to feel a little bit more supported in a pose that maybe you couldn't reach before. So if you have your props, go ahead and gather those. Otherwise, just simply observe this video as a learning tool and we'll get started. All right, so the first prop that I want to talk about is going to be our yoga blanket. And they're pretty big if you unfold them. I kind of just folded mine in thirds just to kind of create a little bit of a cushion. And I say a cushion because a lot of the times in seated yoga postures, our hips and like our low back might be a little bit uncomfortable, and adding a little bit of height under the hips can really alleviate some of that discomfort. And something as simple as a blanket can be slid under the hips to help alleviate that pressure. So what we can do with our yoga blanket, first off, I'm just going to turn to the side so you can see where I place this here, is just using it as a cushion to sit on. Now, this can be used in any seated posture, whether our legs are extended or if we're doing like a butterfly pose or anything that requires us to sit on the floor. This can create a little bit of lift beneath the hips. So that is the first way we can use our yoga blanket to assist our practice. Additionally, we can use our yoga blanket as an extra cushion for our knees. So if we're in a tabletop position, for example, say you have some pain or discomfort in your knees, or your mat just seems a little bit hard, it doesn't quite kind of cushion you enough, well, we happen to have a yoga blanket here that we could unfold or continue to fold, whatever we need, and place that under the knees for a little bit of cushion in our tabletop position. So not only can we use it to help support the body, but we can use it as a tool to create a little more comfort for our flow. Next, I want to touch on using the blanket for child's pose. So for this one, I'm going to roll it kind of back up into our thirds here, and we can use our blanket a couple of different ways for child's pose. So my favorite way to use props for child's pose is actually to put support in this little crevice here between the thighs and the calves. Because when we're in child's pose, we really want our hips and our heels to make contact, but let's be honest with ourselves here. Sometimes that just doesn't really happen. So what we can do is put props to fill that space, so then we're not trying to hold the body up, because that can get tiring, and we could be using our other muscles and kind of clench the body in ways that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. So the first way we can use our blanket in child's pose, you can even roll it up into like a little blanket burrito if you need, and kind of reach around and tuck that blanket kind of underneath the tushy, anywhere in between the the legs here. So then when we go to sit back, we have the support of that blanket. Because I see a lot of times people will kind of be hanging out in child's pose like this because they can't quite bring the hips down to the heels. And that's okay. Sometimes we just don't have that flexibility. But now we have this prop that we can use to fill that gap, so then we're not holding the body up in an uncomfortable way. So that's a great way to use a blanket for child's pose. And really, it's very versatile, so you don't necessarily have to use these props in the specific ways that I'm explaining. If there's any pose or position that you feel like you need to be a little more comfortable or a little more supported, you can use these props and apply what you learned to individual poses. My favorite way to use a blanket actually is in Shavasana, or if you're laying down, to just use it as a little pillow, because I mean sometimes, let's be honest, like your neck might be a little stiff from laying down, so you can kind of keep it rolled up like so, and when we lower down to the mat, kind of use that blanket to support the shoulders and the head. And you could even like fold it and like get all super fancy and comfortable, because like in restorative classes or when you take a public yoga class, we're usually in Shavasana for like 2 to 5 minutes, maybe even longer. So this is just going to create a little bit of comfort in the body. And since we're on the floor, another great way to use a blanket in Shavasana, if you don't need the support for your head, is to kind of make that little log that we talked about and place that blanket underneath the thighs or the knees. And this is really great if you have any discomfort in the low back. Just adding a little bit of support under the thighs or under the knees can really kind of help create that connection of the spine to the mat. So that's another great way to use a yoga blanket when you're in Shavasana. And normally this next pose, I usually use yoga blocks, but because most of us have towels or blankets laying around, I'm going to show you this one with our blanket as well. So we can also use our blankets in a recline twist or supine twist if we need a little support there. So you can fold it over as many times as you need, and say we're going to supine twist to the right here. So we have our right leg extended, we pull the left knee into the chest and kind of allow it to cross over the body, and oh no, I can't reach the floor. Well, guess what? If I could find it, we have our blanket here to support the leg. Another great way to use our blanket in our twist is to put it in between the knees. So before you take your twist, you can go ahead and squish that blanket between the knees and then allow the legs to fall to either side. And this is a great way to just give yourself a little bit of a supported pose that's a little bit comfortable, more comfortable on the body. So that's a little tip and trick for using our blanket here. And like I said, if there's any pose that you think you need to find a little bit more comfort in, using a yoga blanket is a great place to start, because it doesn't have to be a yoga blanket. It could be a beach towel or a bath towel or blanket you have on your couch. Anything that you can kind of roll up and use to support your body in that way. So that was our quick little insight to yoga blankets, and now let's talk about yoga blocks. So yoga blocks, we spent a little bit of time with our blanket, and now we're going to go and start to discuss what we can do with our yoga blocks. Now essentially, yoga blocks are a great way to bring the floor closer to you if you can't quite reach. And that's usually what I personally use yoga blocks for, because sometimes I just don't have like the rotation or the flexibility to reach the floor a lot of the time. So using blocks is a great way to kind of bring the mat closer. So the first way we can use a yoga block is very similar to the way we used the yoga blanket, is we could use it underneath our hips as support. So I'll go ahead and turn to the side so you can see. So similarly to the blanket, we can actually use the block as a little seat to kind of lift the body up, because sometimes having the hips higher than the knees can really alleviate discomfort in the back and in the hips. So that is the go-to for a yoga block if you don't have a blanket handy. Additionally, before we go into too much detail about additional uses for the blocks, I want to show you that these yoga blocks here, they have 3 heights. So that's really important to keep in mind throughout your practice. So the first height is the lowest height, where it's kind of a horizontal shape, and this is going to give just a little bit of kind of lift from the ground. The second height, if you rotate a little bit, it gets a little bit taller. So this is the second height of the block here, which gives you just a little bit more lift. And then the third height is if you rotate it again and it's kind of in its more vertical shape. This is the third height for the block. Now, I want you to keep in mind, the higher you go, the kind of more wobbly and less stable these foam blocks can get. So if you're really using these blocks to support the full weight of the body for any reason, make sure that you're nice and straight and the weight is nice and balanced so you don't kind of wobble over. Or invest in a nice set of cork blocks or even wooden yoga blocks. Those are a lot sturdier when it comes to supporting the body, but for a beginner's practice and just kind of learning how to use the props, the foam blocks are a little bit more inexpensive and they're a great place to start. They're also a lot more comfortable to sit on and stuff if that's what you're using them for, but I just want you to keep in mind, just for safety, that you don't want to purely depend on the blocks for stability solely if you're using them on their highest height. So the first thing we did is we sat on the block, and you can also use the block in hero's pose. Sometimes practitioners have discomfort in the knees. Sitting cross-legged isn't really an option. So a nice alternative for Sukhasana is taking hero's pose. So hero's pose, you kind of sit back on the legs roughly here, but sometimes that isn't even very comfortable. So you could use the block on whatever height you need to kind of sit the hips on there. So this is on the middle height, or even the highest height. Kind of get squared away here, which on the foam blocks is a little wobbly. I'm not too fond of that on the foam blocks, so usually I'll just have it on its lowest height for a position like this, but sometimes it's just enough lift to create a little bit more comfort in the body. And since we're kind of in this hero's pose here, I also want to talk about child's pose, because we kind of get into child's pose from this position as well. So another great use for the block in child's pose is having it on its middle height here and sliding that under the sit bones to kind of support the hips, similarly to how we did with the blanket, only this time we're using the block. So we can have a block beneath the hips to support us there. And then additionally, when we get to this position here, you can also use a block to help support the forehead, because sometimes reaching the mat all the way just isn't in your practice. So this is a great way to use the yoga block to support the body. This way you're able to fully surrender in the pose, and you're not doing extra work to hold the body in the position where you're supposed to be kind of a little bit more relaxed. So that's another great way to use yoga blocks in child's pose. So in additionally to child's pose, what else is on the floor? Oh, yogi squat, Malasana is another great way to use the yoga block to sit on. So I don't traditionally come into this pose from seated. Usually I come in from standing, but I don't have quite the flexibility these days to kind of squat down and comfortably sit in Malasana. My body wants to just topple over if I do that. So taking the yoga block underneath the hips for our yogi squat is another great option for our yoga block. In addition to these kind of seated poses, you can definitely use your yoga block in standing poses to kind of have them between the legs to kind of keep your feet hip distance apart. I also really like in forward folds, sometimes to kind of put the block between my legs here, and this one we might even stack two of them to not only keep our spacing in the legs, but when we go into our forward fold, if we're trying to relax the body, if this is like the extent of our fold, we can use those blocks to support the head. And that could be done in any variation of a forward fold. So we've done a few poses on the ground here. Now we're gonna kind of move up into like our standing postures. So I'm gonna come over to this side here, and when I intend on using yoga blocks in my practice, I usually like to keep them kind of at the top of my mat. That way they're always accessible for me to use. So the first pose we're gonna do is our downward facing dog. So sometimes down dog can be a little bit a little extra pressure on the wrists. So you can always use blocks kind of beneath the hands by bringing like the palm of the hand to the edge of the block, or I usually like to do this edge of the block. Just be careful when you're starting out because these blocks are so light. I don't want you to roll over and slip off the block. So if you're using blocks in your downward dog for this purpose, what I would recommend is starting out at the back of the block and using the heel of the hand to support you, curl the toes and lift the hips, and then slowly kind of walk the hands into a position that feels good to you. I personally like to kind of grip the blocks on the back end here. It's just a nice little lift. You can pedal out the feet since we're here. And it's just a really great way to kind of add that additional support in the pose. Additionally, you can always use a yoga block in between the thighs. If you're looking to have a little bit more an active pose, you can kind of squeeze that block in between the thighs here. And then we'll walk into our forward fold. I'm going to take out the block here. And using the blocks in our forward fold is another fantastic way to kind of keep integrity in our poses. So a lot of the times it's a little difficult to reach the mat for our forward fold. You could always bend the knees, of course, but that block on one of three heights is also a great way to bring that mat a little bit closer to the body. And additionally, in our halfway lift, we can use the blocks as support as well, encouraging a nice long straight spine. So we have our halfway lift and our downward dog using our blocks. I'm going to leave our blocks at the top of our mat here, and we're going to come back into downward dog, because another great way to use our yoga blocks is in our lunge. So we're going to take a low lunge. So I'm going to bring the right leg up, pull it into the chest, and step that right leg in between the hands. Now, I'm going to immediately grab my blocks and put them directly under my hands, bring my back knee down to the mat, and uncurl the toes. Now here, in my lunge, I am now able to shine the heart, to be a little bit more comfortable. I'm bringing my blocks a little bit closer to the body, but it really depends on how you can feel most comfortable in the pose. So this just really allows us to kind of keep integrity in the pose and come to its full expression, I would say. So this is a great way to use the blocks in this position. And I know in a few of my videos, I like to couple the low lunge with a hamstring stretch. So for that, you can always walk the hands back towards the body, flex the toes, and still use those blocks to support the body. This way we're keeping space in the chest and in the heart space. We're not hunched over and kind of crunching in any way, and it's not like we're dumping too much weight in the blocks necessarily. We're just using them to kind of help support the body. So that's another great way to use blocks as support in a pose like this. So from here, I'm going to bring my right knee back down to the mat, and I'm going to come back into my downward dog. And for this next pose, we're going to come into extended side angle. This is a great way to use blocks as support. So to get into extended side angle, I'm going to go on the opposite side. The left leg comes up, coming into that lunge. I'm going to immediately use my blocks here as support, rotate my back heel, so my right heel is going to come down to the mat, and then kind of cartwheel up to warrior two here. Whew. getting a little warm over here already. And then to come into extended side angle, you can always use your elbow bent to kind of support the body here and extend out like so. But to come into the full expression of the pose, you can always use that block and then extend the arm up or over, depending on your practice. This really allows for the heart space to remain open in this pose. So I'm gonna rotate back down, and I'm actually gonna come back into my forward fold, because another great way to use a block is to do a twist from our forward fold. So if you bring the block in its highest height, right in front of the body, bend the left knee, we can rotate and twist and extend our right arm up overhead, and do the same thing with the left. So that is a great way to use blocks that way. So I'm gonna come back down to the mat here, and we're gonna do a couple of more poses with our blocks. Okay, so we made it back down to our mat, and we're gonna do a few more poses to incorporate the blocks into our practice. Since we're seated, or since we've come back to seated, the first one I want to touch on is our Baddha Konasana, our butterfly pose. So butterfly pose, we are in a seated position, and our soles of our feet are together, kind of opened up like a book here. And a great way to use blocks is to just set them right under the knees. It feels like such a relief sometimes to have that extra support, because trying to hold the legs up in that position when they just don't have that flexibility in that moment can be a little bit exhausting. So using those blocks as a way to support the knees in Baddha Konasana or butterfly pose is another fantastic use of this prop. In addition to butterfly, let's see, what could I do next? Let's do pigeon pose before we go on our backs. So pigeon pose is, I think it's a little bit more of an advanced pose, but I think if you are patient with your body and listen to what it's telling you and get into the pose nice and slow, it could actually be a really beneficial pose for the hips and low back. So I'm not really going to get into explaining the pigeon pose. I'm just going to show you where to put the props to support the body. We'll go over pigeon pose in a later video, but for today I'm just going to talk about the props. So I like to get into pigeon pose from downward dog. So I'm going to keep my blocks at the top of my mat here so they're easy to access. And I'm going to come into downward dog, lift the hips and kind of settle in. And to get into pigeon pose, I'm going to bring the right leg out, tuck that into the chest, bring the right knee towards the right hand, and kind of bend the knee. I almost said elbow. And then we're going to extend that bottom leg, uncurl the toes, and I like to bring my kind of rotate back on this this hip for a second here, just to kind of position this leg in a comfortable place. But if you see here, this is my pigeon pose, but see how there's a gap right here? So what I can do is shimmy my block under my leg to help support that thigh. So then now I'm not floating on the mat. This actually allows me personally to kind of straighten my front leg a little bit. So this is a great way. I haven't done pigeon in a while, so I'm not going to do that. That's a little much on my hips here. So this is a great way to use a block in pigeon pose. Additionally, you can use a block and place that underneath the right buttock and the right thigh here, which you can't really see from this angle, so I'm going to do it on the other side so you can see the second position for our block. So position 1 in pigeon is under the extended leg thigh, top of the thigh. So I'm going to come back out of this pose, coming back into downward dog, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. So this time I'm going to bring my left leg up, left knee to left wrist, kind of bringing an L shape in that bent leg, bringing that right knee down and uncurling the toes. So I could also on this side bring that block under the extended thigh, but for this pose I'm going to show you this position. So you could bring the yoga block underneath the left hip. So this is going to allow our hips to be squared to the mat. And additionally to supporting the hips in pigeon pose, if you wanted to extend your pigeon and kind of fold into it, you could always stack the fists. Move the blanket here out of our way, but you can also use a yoga block to support the head. This again is just allowing for a little bit more relaxation in the pose. So we're not kind of clenching the back and the shoulders to hold the body up. And again, remembering that the block has 3 heights, so you can adjust as needed. So this is a great way to use blocks for pigeon pose. So I'm going to come out of pigeon pose here, kind of stretch it out, come back down here. Another fantastic way to use yoga block is in bridge pose. I love restorative bridge. It's so comfortable. And for this pose, I'm going to kind of spin around here and slowly lower down to the mat. And then to get into our bridge pose, you want to kind of have the feet spaced out quite a bit. Not part of what I'm about to do, but you could always have a block in between the legs to kind of get your stance set up correctly here, because why not? And again, remember the block has 3 heights. It has the lowest height, the middle height, and the highest height. Now for this pose in particular, I do not recommend using the foam blocks on their highest height. They're just a little too squishy. If you have a cork or a wooden block, you could probably try it, but for using these kind of squishier foam blocks, just stay on the lowest height or the middle height when you're doing a supported bridge. So you want to put the block on your sacrum. So it's not like on your butt or on your back. You got to find like the tip of the end of your tailbone. So I'm actually going to do, oh, there we go. Yeah, I'm going to do the middle height. So finding that position of the block kind of on your sacrum, once you feel it, it's almost like a nice release, and you don't want any pinching to happen in that position. So it takes some wiggling around to find that perfect spot for bridge pose, but it's going to be right on your sacrum, and it's just a great way to kind of help the body release into the pose a little bit better. It's one of my favorite restorative poses. So we'll slowly release, and even doing Supta Baddha Konasana is another great way to use those blocks. We talked about Baddha Konasana earlier when we were seated. Supta is just reclined, so reclined butterfly pose, again using those blocks to support the knees. Additionally, we used the blanket earlier to support the body in a recline twist, and we can do that with blocks as well. So whether that's having both knees bent and a block in between the knees to support them, or you can have one in between and underneath. You can kind of get creative in ways to use those blocks to support the body in your twist. So there's many ways to use these yoga blocks to help support the body, and those are just a few. And if there's any way you're like, hey, can I use a block for this? Drop me a comment, and we can definitely chat about it. But those are just a handful of ways to use yoga blocks in your practice. So next up, we will talk about the yoga strap. All right, so we talked about the yoga blanket. We used our yoga blocks to help support us, and now we're going to use the yoga strap. Now you can use a belt if you don't have a yoga strap. A lot of yoga mats come with like a carrying strap that have like 2 loops on it, like for the mat to go inside. You could use that. You could use a towel, a scarf. That would work too. But what's neat about most yoga straps is they come with like these little loops on the end, and you could make your strap into like a giant circle if you want. So if you thread it through both of the little loops and then back through just one, like so, you can actually create like a little belt. So belt. So you can create like a little loop at the end, which is really useful if you want to put it around your foot. So That's pretty cool. So I'll show you that. So we made a little loop on the end of our strap, and you definitely don't need a loop. You can use the strap like just around your feet and hold both hands. But since I made the loop, we'll use the loop and kind of do that. So I'm going to rotate here. So one way we can use our strap, I'm actually going to pretend the loop's not here for this one first, is in our forward folds. So you can loop, bend the knees to get there, loop the strap around your feet for your forward fold and use that tension to kind of pull the body forward, because we don't want to like hunch over like when we're doing our forward folds, like we're just scrunching and that's not really stretching the body too much. So if we have the strap, you can even wrap it around your hands if you want, and just using that to guide the body forward. Like honestly, this is a forward fold, so don't let anyone tell you different. I'm definitely folding, but my heart is shining and I'm very active in the pose. So that's a great way to use the strap that way. Additionally, we can use the strap if we're doing some stretching with the legs, or if we're in legs up the wall, if you don't happen to be right next to a wall. So I'm going to come down to my back, and again, we could use the strap on both feet, extending both feet up to the sky. This is a great way to kind of bring the legs a little bit straighter. And I really feel my spine in contact with the mat now. Like maybe I can only lift my legs here and I'm like, my core isn't that strong and I can't quite do it. This is gonna help that as well. Another way we can use the strap in our extended leg pose is, I made my loop too tiny. Hold on one sec. Okay, is to loop the strap around one foot. And this could be used to, if you're doing like a straddle, if maybe one leg isn't as strong, you can have it on both actually. Or if you're trying to do like, I should put it on the other foot so I can do this actually. Like another version of, words are hard. Recline twist, supine twist, wrong supine. Okay, so if you want to do a supine twist this way, you can use the strap to kind of hold the leg and cross it over the body. That's kind of an interesting way to do the supine twist as well. Okay, sorry that got a little silly there, but legs up the wall, supine twist. What else can we do with the strap? Happy baby is another one. I'm gonna undo this. Why is this hard when I'm laying down? I don't know. Okay, okay. Forget the little loopy. I don't want the loopy. So, okay. So we did our legs up the wall. Maybe we want to go into happy baby, so that we can bend the knees and pull the knees into the chest a little bit here. This is a great way if you can't quite reach your feet. So you can do happy baby, you can release one and do half happy baby, maybe with an extended leg, or like, oh my gosh, you can use your block and your strap here, half happy baby, half Supta Baddha Konasana with the block right here. Whew, that's a good one. All right, so those were fun. What else can we do with a strap here? Let me get up here so I can show you. Another strap, we did the folds, legs up the wall, extended, half, happy, baby. Oh, one of my favorites is cow face arms, which is really great. We did this, I think, in our last video, maybe, when we were talking about the shoulders. So cow face arms is a great stretch for the shoulders, but sometimes we just don't have the flexibility. So I'm gonna turn around and show you my back. So we're gonna come into a easy seated pose, and I like to have the strap in whatever arm is going up, just so you can kind of grab it with this lower arm. So I'm gonna hold the strap with both ends because it's kind of long here, so now the strap's a little bit shorter. And to begin, we're gonna take our arms out to a T. Strap is gonna be in the right hand because right hand's going up. So arms are out to a T. We're gonna bend, we're gonna face the left palm to the back of the room and bend the elbow, and then just bring that to the low back. For the right hand, we're gonna keep the palm, easy for me to say, the palm facing the front of the room and bend the shoulder and bring that hand behind the head, gripping the strap. See how that strap just kind of dangles into that left hand? So we're gonna grab the strap with the left hand. You really wanna rotate that right shoulder so you're kind of tucking that arm into the ear, and then just wiggle the hands together here. So maybe this is enough for you. That's fantastic. Now you can actually reach and do the pose instead of being like, oh no, which, I mean, it depends on the flexibility of your shoulders, like in the moment. If you can wiggle the strap all the way, you can get a little bit closer, or, you know, if you can do the full pose, then your hands could grasp, which this doesn't always work. I happen to be able to do it on this particular side. So then to release, we'll do the same thing, reverse engineer the pose, unwind. Now I'm gonna show you on the other side just because I want you to know that both sides of your body might not always be the same. So arms out to a T, we switched hands with the strap. Right hand now, we're gonna put palm towards the back of the room, bend the elbow, bring that hand to the sacrum. Left hand is holding the strap, palm facing towards the front of the room, bend that elbow and allow that strap to fall into the right hand. Really bring that left arm closer into the head here and then wiggle the hands up the strap. Because guess what, folks? This is as far as I can go today. So this is a great illustration for me personally why I love using props, because the flexibility in my shoulders is not always the same. There has been a few times I could reach my hands together, but not often. So we'll go ahead and release, right hand, unwind to the left. So that is an awesome way to use the strap, especially in that particular stretch. You can also use the strap if you're doing like an extended leg raise standing up or dancer's pose. I'm not really gonna get into those standing postures right now, but in future videos when I do touch on those poses, I will make sure that I have my yoga strap handy so we can go over how to use the props in that position. So those were just a few ways to use our props, our strap, our block, our blanket, and I just really want you to know that this is an accessible tool that you can use to help enhance your practice. So I hope you learned a little bit more about props and how to use them in certain poses today. I know we didn't technically do like a yoga practice. I kind of just jumped in and out of a lot of different poses, but I really hope that you were able to learn something from this video and realize that props are a wonderful tool to incorporate in your yoga practice. If you have any other questions about poses that I did not mention today, and if there's a way to use props in those poses, go ahead and drop me those suggestions in the comment section below, and I would love to get back to you and throw you some suggestions for those. I don't have a specific recommendation for prop. I mean, I use Gaiam blocks and strap. I just bought a kit on Amazon that has 2 blocks and a strap. That's a great way to kind of start your collection. And then if you just type in yoga blanket into Amazon, you could find one too. I mean, I think you could get like all 4 of these things for probably like 30 bucks or so on Amazon. I'll look to see if I could find a kit or something, and I'll put that in the description box below just so you can have a reference. Not sponsored in any way, just this is what I use and here, try it and maybe you'll like it type thing. So I'll definitely link some of those Amazon things as well, just so you have that for your reference. And if you have any questions about the poses we did go over, let me know. Last but not least, if you liked this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you really like this video, please consider subscribing, because I really enjoy creating content for this channel and would love to continue to do so. If you have any suggestions for future videos, I would love to hear that from you as well. So drop me all of those goodies in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video today and learned something and can apply what you learned to your practice. Let me know how it goes. Until then, I can't wait to see you in the next video. Okay. Just kidding.